Well, we have a really interesting session planned for tonight. It's going to be focused on Canadians in the global market in terms of leadership and innovation. We put together a really well-regarded panel that has a ton of experience in telecom and software and applications. And what we wanted to do is create a really stimulating conversation with members of the Mobile Monday community to really bring out things that Canadians do well, where we're kind of missing the boat, and what do we have to do as a country to really get back on the map in terms of being leaders in communication. So Alex and myself talked a lot about this. We put a lot of thought into who we wanted to sit on the panel, and we were lucky enough to track down Bob Ferchat, Karna Gupta, and Stephen Woods. And Bob is originally from Bell Mobility as chairman and CEO. He also was president of Northern Telecom Canada back in the 80s. Karna has a huge track record in telecom, and most recently was the CEO of Certicom. And Stephen Woods, of course, is the site director for Google Canada, and they have a global mandate to work with Google in California on the development of mobile services. So now you can go, Alex.
Yes. So yeah, this event has been something we've been planning for quite a while. I mean, Jim and I have been running Mobile Monday for I guess it's 4 years now. And one of the things that I saw when I went to the first Global Summit back in 2006 was there were a lot of parallels drawn between the different chapters about leadership and what it took for startup companies in different markets to excel. And there was a glaring gap in terms of how Canadian companies were perceived versus companies in Asia and Europe. And so we're excited about the event tonight. We have a very good turnout. We hope this will become a regular theme. I think the other thing that we're also testing with this small video segment going forward, this is a bit of a trial run, is we want to make sure that we give smaller startup companies in the GTA and across Canada the opportunity to be profiled through the Mobile Monday Toronto chapter, to give them kind of a presence and a voice in the community, and to give other people the opportunity to discover these companies. Some general updates that I'd like to give on Mobile Monday as a global entity. As you may or may not know, Mobile Monday Toronto is one of 73 active chapters worldwide. The initial Mobile Monday started back in 2000 by mobile professionals from Nokia and Finnish startups. Since then, the movement, that we like to call it, has sprouted into 73 markets. There are 3 coming on stream. And what we'd like to do go forward is to emphasize this footprint, or this global entity, and the benefits of being part of our community and helping companies in the Toronto area benefit from this footprint worldwide. One of the things we'd like to announce, Mobile Monday's Malaysian partners will be hosting the Go Mobile 2009 event. You can go to the website www.gomobile.my. This event last year had 60,000 visitors.
Wow.
This year they're expecting 100,000 visitors, and the event is being held from October 23rd to the 25th. Basically, the focus around this event, there will be great bargains offered on handsets, accessories, and packages, and there will be major activities planned around mobile fashion, mobile entertainment, and multimedia, with 2 photo competitions that the Malaysian partners are coordinating on. We also like to announce that a new chapter launched in August of 2009 in Mexico. This is a market with 80 million users, and 10 million are added every year. And it was founded by 2 individuals, Arturo Robles, who's Managing Director for Noon Venture Consulting, and Mauricio Delgado, Executive VP of Agave Mobile. And obviously the goal is to bring together the same type of community that we've done in Toronto. And lastly, this is something that just started recently. The Mobile Monday Global Organization has launched a new newsletter that talks about Mobile Monday goings-on around the world, and you can visit www.mobrules, that's MOBRULZ.com, and you can find out about the newsletter. They've announced the Global Summit for next year after the Vancouver Olympics, and hopefully Jim and I will be in a position to represent Toronto there. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Hello everyone, thanks for coming out to October's Mobile Monday event. We have a really interesting session today that's focused on Canadians and global leadership in the mobile and high-tech space. We've put together a really great panel that has a lot of experience in telecom, hardware, software, applications, new emerging players in market. So should make for a very interesting discussion this evening. We want to make it very interactive. So we have 2 microphones set up in both aisles. If you have questions, certainly get up and ask the questions. Our moderator tonight is Randall Howard, and if a lot of people are familiar with Randall, he's been fairly active in the Mobile Monday community over the last year. He's been very helpful in working with us on things like the venture capital panel and pitch. Just a little bit on Randall's background. He's a partner in Verdex's Capital, and he has a lot of experience in the US market, the Canadian market, and Europe. He's an investor in a few different startups. One is IOTM, a collaborative conferencing service. CoreWorks, a project information control software company that's used in mega projects. He's also been the founder of a publicly traded software company called MKS, and he helped that successfully grow to $45 million in revenue and 375 employees worldwide. He's also very active in advising companies either in a director capacity or as an advisor. Lots of the companies you may be familiar with: Gore Mutual Insurance, IOTM, CoreWorks, NACO Systems Corp, Good Contacts, Whitehill Technologies, Waterloo Maple Software, Arise Technologies, and Nano Design. I don't know how you have any free time if you do all that work. So without further ado, Randall will help introduce the panel and open tonight's event. Thanks, Randall.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah. Well, thanks a million, Jim. Actually, just to clarify, some of those directorships are over past years, so they're not all concurrent. Otherwise, you would question my sanity, I think. Well, I'm pleased to be here tonight. This is actually going to be a very interesting panel. Before I introduce the esteemed panelists who are over here, I just thought I might say just a few words about some of the processes we're going to shape. I think everybody probably read the manifesto about how do we get Canada into a position of global leadership in the mobile industry. How does Canada stack up today in the world? What are some of the big gaps and opportunities that might arise? So I just wanted to open with 3 thoughts. First is that RIM, Research in Motion, was recently named the fastest growing company in the world by Forbes magazine in the last few weeks. That's pretty interesting. That's a mobile company. That's a leader. That's really good news. Also, there's many startups. I know in the audience, Polar Mobile is here, Vigo. There's a whole bunch of mobile-based startups you see here. We have a number of mini success stories. So there's good news there. Way back in history, and I got to say this for a reason, when I started in the industry in the 70s, and you know, I started when I was 2 years old, Nortel Networks, Bell Northern Research, seemed to be like at the state of the art. They were the leaders in the industry, and Canada was really at the epicenter of innovation, developing all the cool stuff. I think partly because Canada was a very sparsely populated, distributed country. And so we were a leader. And to some extent, what I'm going to say a little bit later is that we have lost some of that leadership, though. So that's the second point. The third point is, and this is, I think, why all this is important, as opposed to just an interesting thing, is that the confluence of the web and networking and mobility on smartphones and superphones. Superphones, now that everybody has a smartphone, I think this is the year majority of people have smartphones. Superphones are the phones that have a real operating system under them, like Mac OS, Linux, or something that can have 30 or 40 applications running on them. So the boundaries between superphones and little computers are blurring significantly. They're creating new application platforms so that almost anything you do in information technology can be scaled to involve mobile. And that's a pretty interesting dynamic in the world. And one of the things that I heard, a recent stat, and there's probably different estimates on this, is that by 2015, so that's like 5-6 years, the majority of broadband communications will be mobile. So that's interesting from where we are today. So what that's really saying is that mobile's kind of in everything, the way software's in everything. So as Canada, better be big in it. So why is not all well with mobile? So, and we're going to talk about this in the panel. I just wanted to give a little bit of background. So after an early lead in North America, in particular in Canada, Europe and Asia seem to leapfrog us. And there's a lot of reasons for it. We don't want to go into them. But to this day, anyone who travels in Europe and in Asia, and sometimes in way less developed countries, finds a pretty seamless service with a lot of applications and things that are way ahead of where we are. And yet, you travel down the 401, how many times does your cell phone signal drop? Feels like a big beta test here sometimes. So why is that? Those are things we should check. And since 2000, to think that, you know, it used to be a rich world thing, we've gone from having the developing world, like the lower income economies, from being about 20% of mobile customers to being 75% of mobile customers, saying that a lot of ideas and business models and customers are based outside of the OECD countries. And also, just look at Canada in terms of data rates. Again, it's another test. How can you build world-beating mobile applications when we had the highest data rates in the world and so on? And I know that's starting to change. I just saw an announcement came through at 5:25 today that, that Bell and TELUS are going to launch the iPhone. This is interesting, which means that we have HSPA, like we have real-world standards finally on those two operators. So the day of competition in Canada is less than a month away. So maybe there's hope. And so the reason I mention the iPhone is just as the iPhone, it's broken the stranglehold the carriers had on the control of application delivery. And again, we can talk more about this in distributing applications. And actually what's happening is other people are emulating that business model and opening app stores all over the place. So to some extent, in fact, I stole this from my friend Peter Evans at Mars, but he says that the operators maybe are actually going to be reduced to just being dumb pipes, and that's not his part, and they'll become the software marketplace of the future. Could be. We don't know. So we got to talk about those things. So it's an exciting time in mobile, and one thing I wanted to say in talking about our first guest, Bob Ferchat, is that one of the things that I was looking at, I was just in Austria and I bought one of those sticks. And you know, that stick should have been made by Nortel or Ericsson, but guess who made it? Huawei, which is a Chinese government organization that, you know, 10 years ago was probably infringing patents and copying things. Today, they're on the leading innovation. Rogers just launched their 21 megabits HSPA Plus service, and it's a ZTE stick, which again is a similar kind of company. Again, it's not a Nortel stick. So I think that's just a little bit of a background here. So Bob Ferchat, I just had the pleasure of spending half an hour with Bob over coffee at Mercado, and he's a really amazing individual. I mean, he is someone who can do both finance, CEO, accounting, engineering. Like, he really knows the industry inside and out. Bob was a true pioneer of really building a lot of that great mobile infrastructure that we built in this country that we talked about. He was president of Nortel Networks over a number of years. He was president of Bell Mobility over a number of years. But the interesting thing about Bob, I mean, I don't think it's accurate to characterize Bob as a pioneer, because Bob today, supposed to be retired, gets job offers faster than he can deal with them, is working with startups. He's written a book on what it takes to innovate. Bob is just a fount of ideas, and that's why it's going to be a great panel of what we need to be doing to put Canada on the roadmap. So I thought I'd lead you with a little bit with that, the Chinese actually controlling the innovation in USB sticks. I don't know if that's a good start or not, but Bob, over to you.
Okay. I'm not sure exactly where to start, because I'm not anything that he said I was. So I'm just an old man trying to make a living, and I've had the fortune of working with some absolutely wonderful people who are very, very bright and who can really make some sense out of what's going on around them. The one tip I would give you that might be useful is that everything happens in multiple dimensions. And when those dimensions get out of balance, there is a chaos, a discontinuity, we used to call it at my various jobs, in the system. And that discontinuity creates an opportunity. But to examine the discontinuity, the financial system went haywire. It's a discontinuity. Every financial institution, who are the biggest data players, is going to have to change. Going to have to change the way they do business, the amount of security they offer, the amount of checks and balances that are in their system automatically. Now, so that it means that this year is the best year of your life. It really does. It means that there are more opportunities being created this year than ever before, because there are more discontinuities. This recession we're into is a discontinuity. You have to be able to take advantage of that. Second issue I would suggest is that you have to look at these discontinuity in 3 dimensions. And first of all, the vertical dimension, you have to look at it from 50,000 feet and try to see what's really going on, what fundamentals are changing. Second issue you have to look at it is from a strategic standpoint, having identified the fundamentals are changing, how do I take advantage of it? The third level you have to look at is from the human level, how do I organize and motivate and incentivize the people to take advantage of this opportunity? So I would just leave it at that 2009 is a great year. 2010 probably will be better. And the whole system of what's going on in mobile it's really maturing. It's becoming an adult technology. It's becoming something that we all depend upon. And it will be more a part of the future than it was of the past. And it's been an enormous part of the last decade. It's been fantastic the way it's grown. In the future, it will grow even faster. It will grow with the internet speeds. It will grow with the internet reach globally. So that's just an introduction.
Great. Thank you, Bob. Okay, our next panelist, and before I go on to the next panelist, I should say that our format is each of the panelists are going to say a few opening words. I'm going to then run through a few questions to sort of frame the topic we talked about for a few minutes with the panelists, and each of them are going to give their perspective on that so that we kind of make sure we cover things off. Then we're going to have ample time at the end to open the floor to questions. We hope and have a lot of time for Q&A because this is a big topic, shall we say. So we're now going to switch over to primarily a software-driven domain. Karna Gupta, I just had the opportunity to meet this evening, has an illustrious career internationally because he originally started out in the telecom industry, so deep telecom experience, but he's had at least 3 or 4 very specific mobile-based and primarily software-based business applications. He was a senior executive at Converse, which was doing things like mobile billing. And in mobile billing, as we all know, is a pretty important application, and it also generates a lot of dollars. So he worked on that. Before that, he was at Citraca Mobile, which was building a lot of, as I understand it, at least the Java infrastructure for this current generation of smartphones, and it was a very successful exit that they had at Citraca Mobile. And most recently, Karna had the opportunity to be the CEO of Certicom, which is really building the probably leading mobile encryption frameworks that exist to enable things like e-commerce and so on. And I think a lot of people know there was a hostile takeover there. Karna had to go through that. It was probably itself. We could spend an evening talking about the war stories on that. And it led to a successful exit to Research in Motion just a little bit earlier this year. So Karna, please.
Thank you, Randall. It's a pleasure to be here. My perspective on, given that it's Mobile Monday, I'll kind of talk in terms of application area mostly. When I look at a mobile phone as a consumer, my sense is, we're facing with an application clutter. There is a lot of applications on mobile phone. You really don't know what's of value. Same applies to the people who are developing it. So the biggest issue, the challenge in the industry-wise we're facing is, as the world changes, as Bob mentioned, the penetration goes deeper and a greater and greater application gets built out. How do you know what to use? And if you're developing it, how do you know that your application would be looked at favorably? How do you differentiate yourselves in the marketplace? So those are the biggest questions and challenges we have. In terms of data point, there's only about 30% of the mobile users download applications. So 70% of the people are still using voice or SMS. So globally, that's the average number. 30% of the people downloading applications anywhere, and rest are not. So how do you create a broader reach to create a bigger market? Is there a collaborative ecosystem being built out with the carriers? Or are we at a traditional creating multiple camps where the carriers could get disintermediated from the process? So that is another question that needs sorted out from a business model point of view. So when I look at this crowd here and what we're doing as a Canadian companies, as startups, some of the things you need to look at is look outside north-south. As a Canadian young companies, we often look north-south to be our normal business boundaries. You don't have to. So to Bob's point, I'll kind of echo one issue. Like just look at a country like India. There's 274 million phones out there. 234 of them are mobile. So it kind of tells you where the growth is. Same thing is repeating in Russia. Same thing is repeating in Brazil. Same thing is repeating in China, all of East Europe. So if you're a young entrepreneur looking at applications to take out, you do not have to look only at your home territory to launch your product. You need to look across the pond, that the markets are much more robust, much more vibrant. How do you get there? That's part of the discussion needs to come into the play as you build out the new applications for the mobile space. So that's the perspective, Randall. It would be interesting to figure out what the audience thinks about it, and we can maybe talk more.
Raises an interesting question, Karna. How many people here are in or consider themselves to be involved in a startup right now? Just a quick raise of hands. So I'm saying that's 50%. What do you say? Is that about right? So what are the other half of you doing? So are the other half in big companies, like maybe big carriers that, or someone tell me what you're doing, like in what kinds of businesses, just to get an understanding of the demographics here. How many people are in investment, actually? Not enough. Okay, someone had their hand up over there. They were going to say what they were doing. Roger, so how many people are in a carrier? So that's still only 3 or 4%. So there's about 40% of the people we still haven't figured out, but maybe we will through the rest of the evening. So you help us with that. But anyway, I'd like to welcome our next guest. And when we put this panel together, we wanted to have a diverse set of views because, as we know, as Bob said, mobile's changing. We're at a big disruption. And one of the forces shaping I said Google. Is Google. One of the forces shaping mobile is Google. And so our next guest is Stephen Woods, who has just moved back about a year ago to head up the whole site of Google Waterloo. And for those who know the history, Google Waterloo has a product mandate to do a lot of mobile things. They were actually producing a lot of the WebKit browsers, like sort of the leading edge browsers for mobile. But they've turned it into a much bigger product mandate. And if Steve wants to talk about that, I'll let him do that, because I'm sure he can do a better job than I can. Prior to that, Steve spent a decade in the Valley. Steve is a Canadian, again, but he spent a decade in the Silicon Valley building a number of companies. The first one he took down there, Quack.com, which was using voice in innovative ways to enable e-commerce. And it had an exciting acquisition to AOL. I saw Steve last week at OVTS up in Ottawa telling the amazing story of that. And again, like each of you people probably have a story. Bob has a story about Nortel. It was a pretty interesting story in itself about how AOL bought you folks, and I bet you learned a lot on that. And then subsequent to that, Steve and some people started up another company, an ad network called NeoEdge Networks, which you ran for a number of time. And then you decided to move in-house into sort of a more corporate, but still very kind of a startup culture type of innovation at Google. So I think it's a very interesting progression. What I heard from you, Steve, was having gone literally from different levels of looking at innovation, from startup to a company that's up and coming like Google. And for me, one of the things that's interesting about Google, not even necessarily your mandate, is that they seem to have an interest in keeping the web platform open. People that, in terms of trying to recreate a web platform that is very much like a computer and a web-based platform, which is very different than the carrier culture, obviously. So, and I understand from your background that you can straddle both worlds. So I think you're going to bring a very interesting perspective to the panel as well. So please, go ahead.
Thank you, Randall. Thank you very much for having me and for having Google here. We've been talking for a while about the web as an open platform for mobile. And I think some of the great comments here have led to the fact that the internet is essentially becoming the mobile internet. There isn't going to be two classes of internet, there's going to be one internet. And as a result, in Waterloo, we've been pushing the boundaries of what's possible with web-based browser platforms for some time. We are probably the preeminent advocate internally at Google for HTML5-based applications. We work closely with the WebKit team were involved closely with that. And we believe, not surprisingly, that an open platform in which innovators and startups can reach the widest possible reach of consumers is what made the internet wonderful. It's what made it a revolutionary platform, and it's what will make the mobile platform equally revolutionary. I would like to probably add that I think the comments that have been made here regarding discovery are good ones, and that while we're not against anything, we are pro ubiquity. So, for example, we definitely believe that there should be one internet, not many stovepiped internets.
Okay, well, thank you, Steve. I think now, at this point, one of the things that I should mention about Bob, which I neglected to mention, and I gave him the perfect setup, so if he wants to speak about this for a minute. One of the most interesting things that Bob did last year, earlier this year, it was in the papers in July, I don't know the length of time, but he led a team of people that led an effort to buy back Nortel, to keep it in Canadian hands. I think it's like $1 billion deal, and that in itself was a story. So each of our panelists have some pretty interesting stories in the last year. But what's interesting about that is we all know that there's a huge amount of government money went in to build a treasure chest of intellectual property around networking and communications. So that's one of the things Bob worked on. So if you want to say a word on that, please do. But the first question I want to put to the panelists, starting with Bob, is really to maybe give us your sense of where does Canada sit on the world stage, like in terms of mobile? Are we leaders? Are we behind? Are our companies competitive? Do they need work? Like, kind of do your benchmarking check of where Canada sits next to other countries right now. Like, where are we today? Maybe do a little bit of a SWOT analysis. What's our strength and weakness on that, if you could?
Me?
Yeah, sure. I mean,
I think Canada, as always, has incredible potential. We've got lots of smart people. We've got a good basic infrastructure. But I have to say, if this race we're in is a marathon, we ain't at the front. And just politely, we really missed an opportunity while we fussed around with various other programs and trying to be more than we were capable of being. In any company, if you overreach yourself, you can get into trouble. And I think Canada has a lot of catching up to do. That's an opportunity because applications have been developed. A lot of the groundwork has been done in other countries. So swallow our pride and copy it, plagiarize it, improve it, and make it better, and make it Canadian. Where do you think Huawei got its base? I know how it got its base. Through copying and starting from where other companies left off. We can build the future for Canada, and we should start where the other companies have left off. We shouldn't try to reinvent things. And that's a big danger because people want to get down into the technological roots. That's not where the action is. The action is up at the top level, the application level. And we can use association, partnerships. You don't have to be an outright plagiarist. But if you plagiarize from 3 or 4 more companies, it's called invention. And that's what the Chinese have done so well. They haven't copied it directly. They've taken intelligence from various companies and combined it in a different way, and now they have world-class products. And they take on the Ciscos of the world. I mean, they really are always aiming at Cisco. And they're building applications, and the enticement is, of course, buy it from us, it's cheaper. Guess what happens in 5 years in the future? It won't be cheaper. It's cheaper in the beginning as a penetration strategy. It's cheaper as the old days Japanese cars were cheaper. Now they're not. They're right up there with North American cars. In fact, Lexuses are a little bit more. Although Toyota, I understand, is in a little bit of trouble. But the opportunity for Canada is to look around the world, look globally, search out what's being done, and try to find a way to do it better. And every invention, every application can be improved upon.
So what I heard you say, you said several things, but 2 of the ones that I would point out, Bob, is you talked about probably preeminent is to seize on applications that are going to be important and drive value. So applications are where the competition is going to play out. And secondly is for Canadian companies building applications to not build them to a Canadian scale, but to build them world class. And so do you see any strengths and weaknesses of Canada trying to do that specifically? Do you have any specific feedback on, if you said those are two important things to do, do you have any specific feedback on why that either is challenging or why we're good at it, perhaps, or both?
I think the opportunity we have is that our banking system is very good. I mean, in this recent crash, our guys came out of it smelling like a rose. Did they deserve to? That's a matter of opinion, but they did. Mm-hmm. So the fact is, where the money's going to be in the future is in transactions. I mean, Google is taking advantage of making a few dollars on advertising. I think the next big thing where the money stream is in transaction processing. And that transaction processing will be a huge opportunity because the way it's set up now is very expensive. Okay. You know, e-banking is the way to go.
Okay. Let's hold that there because I want to sort of save opportunities for the next step, but that's a good one, so let's not lose that thought. Karna, let's step back again to that same question I asked about. Try and benchmark Canada on the world, where you see our strengths and weaknesses in the world stage for mobile. What's your perspective on that?
I had the opportunity in one of my companies to have top 300 carriers worldwide to be my customers. So I traveled pretty much every country you could name. I was there and met the senior guys at the carriers. The whole mobile side, we are far behind. I wouldn't even say, you know, as an innovative country, we have the innovations taking place here. But in terms of commercialization, adoption, and usage, we are significantly behind any other global country. Just to give you some examples, take a country like Russia. 7 years ago, their startup carrier like a VimpelCom had 40,000 subscribers. Today, they have 50 million. The rate of growth they go through, we can't even imagine. And the services, at the same time, service is very robust, very good. It is not selling just airtime and competing the way Rogers and Bell competes. I grew up in Bell. That competition is not there. They're playing a branding game. They have moved on from just talking telecom to consumer branding in terms of positioning products and services. We need to get to that space. Our carriers here need to get to a space where they can talk about branding applications, branding services, all the way to the consumer rather than just fighting it out. My rate is better than yours by 2 cents. It's not going to make it happen. So when you look at the global adoption rate and what's happening in the rest of the world, take billing, for example, which is my software. Most of these emerging countries are offering convergent services with a convergent billing. It is a foreign term or a notion to most of the carriers in North America. They don't even know what a convergent billing means at this stage, never mind implementation.
Well, tell us, what is convergent billing?
So to offer all your services into a common billing so you can, a product manager would be able to sit down and offer whatever the services are across the board to the same customer. So you're not dealing with one service at a time with the end customer. So you're offering a full branded product the same way Gap does their product, the clothesline. The same way, any other consumer product will offer. The Sony offers all their consumer electronics under one brand. That's the way most of the carriers are moving. Go to India, you look at what Aircel has done. Go to China, China Mobile has moved on there. And we're still fighting it out. So the ownership issues are a problem. Banks came out smelling good, but if you look at our country, other than Nortel's success, before what happened, and the current success that RIM, tremendous companies. Name me 3 Canadian companies other than highly regulated field that have been successful. They're banks, they're oil companies, they're insurance companies, and they're phone companies and cable companies. Outside that, name me 5 names in Canada that we have broken through consumer market. So you can't find them.
So Karna,
the issue is commercialization.
So just maybe to quantify that a little bit, I see you pointing the finger at the carriers and saying the carriers in their current ecosystem are part of the problem. They're slowing down innovation.
I don't think they're a problem. I think our
Right.
whole, it's a piece parts. There is a policy issue.
Right.
There is a commercialization issue. Regulatory issue. So it's not a one party to blame.
so
Carriers are doing as good as they could.
Well, so the question is, they are where they are. There's history involved. Do you have a sense of what could be done about it? And you're starting to get to that. Like if we had to go from point A to point B, what's going to make it happen? Is it going to be governments? Is it going to be just increased competition, investment? Like what do you think is going to be the silver bullet here?
I think a couple of things needs to happen. I think the policy area needs to be dealt with in terms of how the companies are regulated. I think to some degree, a lot of the carriers have their hand a little bit strapped behind their back. Mm-hmm. At the same time, they also benefited from it. Mm-hmm. Let's not forget, they benefited from it as well. So the policy issue needs to be dealt with in the Canadian context, how they're governed. Mm-hmm. Very top of the list is probably ownership issues come to the table. So there's a bunch of policy issues that should be dealt with. Second, allowing the government to take Canadian innovations globally. How do we have our policy people help? I spoke recently at Industry Canada and Foreign Affairs in Ottawa. The biggest issue was, shaking on a foreign trade, other countries' dignitaries is a necessary thing, but that doesn't give you trade. You get to know people. Right. How do you build the trade after that? And that's where the infrastructure falls apart. We don't provide the tools to young companies to be successful in China. Right. There is no tax policy associated that it takes you 5 years to build a business in China. How do you support the tax policy? Right. That the VCs are not biting the guys back. Hey, where is my money back?
So what you're in
16 months.
What you're in effect saying is, number one, we know that government policy changes slowly because fixing telecom regulation isn't going to get any politician elected to office, right? Unfortunately. Right. So there has to be ways to do that at an industry-wide groundswell. But what you're really saying is if you're a startup, which is half the people in this room, you've got to find a way to work around the carrier ecosystem that you've inherited and either sell internationally or make it work. Is kind of the impact of what you're saying. Do you agree with that?
I think it's a one man's opinion, so it's my opinion. So it's one man's opinion and take it in that kind of that vein. For a startups to be really successful and not being taken out as soon as you grow up by somebody else, you really need to break the geographical boundary. It is absolutely critical for our startups to go abroad. The world is too big out there. Otherwise, as soon as they hit 2 million, 5 million, 10 million, they're gone.
Right. So two people saying the same thing, like we got to be global.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. To be good in Canada is not enough, you're saying, in effect. Okay, so a lot of good topics there. I'm not even sure how we can address all of those topics because if we have to boil the ocean of fixing telecom regulation tonight, that's going to be tough. But we'll come back to that. Steve, what's your...
Canadians are highly engaged. Canadians are very social. Canadians on the internet are very connected. I think that from the perspective of applications being the drivers of consumer usage, these are good things for us. We're a highly educated, very resourceful country with a lot of innovators. Certainly, that's why Google is here. This is not a secret. This is why we're here in Canada. And I think this is the opportunity that I believe is in front of us. And I'm certainly not an expert on telecom policy, nor do I wish to be. However, I do agree that it is a disadvantage for us to be in a situation with limited bandwidth opportunities, either on broadband or broadband wireless. And this is a significant problem. There are other policy issues, sadly, that go beyond telecom policy into content policy that I think are challenges for us as well. If you take the premise that applications drive innovation and usage, which are historic and obviously slow-moving, but have to do with licensing of content and the differentials between our country and the United States in access to Hollywood content or whatever that might drive the next generation of consumer services. So I think these are all problems or challenges, maybe would be the way that we might phrase it at Google. But certainly, if we want to take the global perspective, we need to find a way to deal with these. Otherwise, we are going to be a second-class community and continue to be, I would say, instead.
Right. Well, just to carry on what you're saying, I think there's a certain amount of agreement on the panel, and that always scares me a little bit. But maybe you could address two things from what you said. One is you've started startups in the Silicon Valley. You've started startups in Canada. What's the difference? Say, this is a hypothetical question now. If you were to start an internet mobile startup here,
Right.
what would be the difference between doing that in the Valley? Do you have some sense, like what would be a gap, or would you have the same opportunity? What would be your perspective on that? Because you've done both.
Right. Well, from the starting point of probably having access to less capital.
Yeah. So the C word comes up.
I think that's bound to be an issue.
And there's no investors in this room, of course. That's very typical.
Right. Well, I think that's disturbing. Again, Google does, I'm speaking on behalf of Google here as well as my own opinion, and Google does have an interest in being an early stage venture group and participant in the Canadian market, and has created a venture arm towards this, and with a lot of interest in the mobile segment. Probably the predominant interest is in the mobile internet segment.
So is that publicly known? Because I wasn't too aware of that as a formal initiative.
I think it has. Google Ventures was announced 6 months ago or so.
There you go.
With a North American mandate, and has not yet become hugely active, but will be. I think beyond that, if in terms of myself, the question was like, what would I do? I've been out talking to startups, lots of startups, particularly in the last couple of weeks, sort of with the resurgent non-collapsing economy. That I've been very interested in talking to people. They come up and say, hey, look at this really wonderful application. And there often is a really wonderful information-based application built for one or other platform. And I often challenge them with, why have you done this? Like, why are you building this stovepiped application that arguably is information-based and probably could be built in HTML5 or something like that, that could have a much wider reach? If you're talking about going global and you're talking about being international, I mean, there are certain things that can be done already. Lots of things can be done already in this, far-reaching application, which gets you out of carrier partnerships and everything and lets you get directly to consumers. So if I was building a consumer service, I would definitely be looking at that and saying, do I really want to make the multiple application platform development effort to go after this platform or that? How many can I afford? Perhaps you can afford them all.
So I mean, that's an important point, and I think, don't want to gloss that over, what you're saying, and part of the reason why I think what Google's doing is very interesting, and to some extent Apple with the iPhone is doing, and a few other players are doing, is providing mechanisms to allow people to, in some sense, bypass the carrier. So instead of a startup trying to fight the carrier battle, you're getting distribution through the iPhone App Store or the BlackBerry app world if they get that working, or the Android initiatives are kind of they're changing the power balance between the carriers and the application writers a little bit, and anyone can jump in here. I think that's maybe part of what's happening. So in other words, it's not the only way to solve it is to change government regulatory policy.
No, I think you're right. I think if you look at, just take the BlackBerry as an example, tremendous Canadian success the RIM has been. And on the application side, they're still kind of coming up to speed when you compare to Apple. But there are startups and there are technologies out there where you can have, you write once and it could be deployed in all systems. So, you just write and it'll work on Android, it'll work on BlackBerry, it'll work on iPhone. And you don't have to write. So there are ways to get around these issues, as you move forward. So
can you be more specific about those? Because what I've found is most of them were built for the feature phone world, not the smartphone world. So
I think you're right. A lot of them were built for feature phone, and then now they're going into the smartphone. There are some limiting factors there.
Okay. Because I think the SKU problem is a big one, right? It's like the fact that to support all the platforms, both of you addressed the fact that as an application developer, there's too many platforms to support, and that can only change over time, right? Bob?
Well, I think I go back to 50,000 feet. How does RIM, which is immensely profitable, obscenely profitable, but how does it do it? It's got a different business model. Its application You pay for it by the month. Okay. It's interesting how you give the piece of hardware, and everybody's going to discount the hardware in order to suck you into paying the monthly fees. But where does RIM make its money? Where's the money stream? Its money stream is the $60 a month, which it splits with the carrier and the people who do the activation part of it, and therefore their continuing money stream that gives them their profit has to do with the carrier model, not the black box model. Like you can't make very much money selling phones. I mean, if you're lucky, you make $10 or $15. How would you like to make $30 a month for every phone you sold forever?
Yeah. So
that's the RIM model. I don't think it's going to last forever because I have some technical opinions about it. But it's a different model. It crosses the line between a manufacturer who makes black boxes of whatever size and functionality and a carrier who charges you for usage. The money stream in the future, those of you who are in startups, the money stream is the per month. That's a lovely way to make money because you have one upfront cost, you can finance that, possibly even make money from it. But that revenue stream on a per monthly basis is like selling iterations of software. The cost is zip.
So how many startups are getting a monthly stream? A few. How many startups are giving what they do away free? A few. How many are like one time? It's not a big number here. So are these startups, some of them pre-product? I'm just trying to understand the other startups that didn't put up their hand. What did I miss? Transactions. Okay, so how many startups are making money on transactions? We're still missing some. There's some missing in action. Again, there's the mystery. Does anyone know? Help me.
No, but the thing you have to worry about with startups, and I've been involved in a number of them, not quite as many as you have, but a number of them, they fall in love with the technology, and they try to sell the technology, which doesn't mean anything, nothing. It really is an enabling system that allows you to tap the money stream. You've got to get to the money stream if you're going to make any money. And Charlotte, God bless you. That's where it's all at. That's how the carriers make money. That's how Google makes money. It's tapped in the other end. It's tapped into the advertising. It's typed in. And by the way, Google is very open, except if you download it, in which case it takes over everything.
Download what?
Download your browser system. The gold one is so intrusive that no matter what I type, I get Google. and you're not different. They're all the people who sell download stuff are the same way. They're very intrusive, and that model is subject to change too.
Download what?
Just the Google Go.
Yeah, I'm not sure. You guys can do it.
Why would you agree with me?
No, I don't.
There's no point in it.
So I think there is another way to make money. I've been talking to startups, as I mentioned, the last few weeks, and I think one thing that was interesting is that in perhaps speaking to 100 startups in both the West and the East, I didn't meet a single consumer company, not one. I met lots of venture capitalists, I met lots of enablers, I met lots of service companies, but not one startup, not one single consumer-facing startup, mobile or otherwise. I think this is seriously a problem. I may have crossed over into my own personal opinion, but
okay.
I believe that there are many opportunities in the enablement space, and I think these are wonderful, but we need to understand consumer behavior. And as I mentioned before, Canadians are highly engaged. So it's a great model to start with people you know, start with Canadians, and go outward. I think it's true you need to be obviously international to succeed. It's absolutely true. We're in a very high revenue marketing country that with good RPMs on the ads. It's true in Western Europe. It's obviously true in the United States. It's true to an increasing degree in other parts of Asia. And I think this is a lacking issue for us. So I think that if there were more consumer companies, where I'm going with this, is maybe it would be more obvious how we could have services companies, for example, web-based application delivery services companies that helped new startups deliver their consumer services, their games, their social networking approaches, their new consumer locally or latitude or whatever else. And I think this is something that may have to be solved somehow with more venture interest, and certainly that would be wonderful.
We keep coming back to the capital word. So what I'd like to do is do one more question before we open up to the audience for each of the panelists. And it's kind of started by where you were going, Steve. If you sort of had to bet on an area and just say, this is going to be a hot area, and the assumption is, I think as we've all said before, pretty well, you said that the internet and the mobile internet are really going to be the same thing. Essentially, everything is going mobile over the next few years. So what are going to be some of the hot areas of value creation where startups could tread and make some money? So, I mean, however you want to answer that question, feel free. But we're looking for market gaps here, big opportunities, let's say over the next 3 to 5 year time frame as a good window. Yeah.
Well, I strongly believe that there is an opportunity to deliver services, platforms, cloud services, so that consumer-facing companies can deliver web-based mobile applications more simply. At Google, we have one. We're making it available. It's called the gov't, and we're trying to make available examples for how this system can be used. We have code.google.com, where we're trying to say, look, this is what we're doing, good and bad. Here's how we do it. Here's the code. Here's a video on how to build this. Like, we're not interested at all in having proprietary examples of how we do tricky little things in HTML5. What we want to say is, here's what we're doing. Try this, copy it, make it better. Share it if you want. We prefer that, but you don't have to. And this is very much in its infancy. We're not in some full-blown J2 EEE. Here's how you build and deliver web applications. We're at the beginning of this. Basically, nobody really knows how to do it properly yet. The browser HTML5 spec is barely a spec. It's barely getting going, and we're already trying to think beyond that. So I think I would personally love to see the community more involved in driving how this happens. There's lots of different pieces missing: tools, server infrastructure, and services.
Could you just repeat what you said, because you went that very quickly?
Sorry.
The platform that you had, is it GWIN?
It's called gov't, Google Web Toolkit. It's a way of building web-based applications.
How do you spell that?
GWT, GWT.
GWT, thank you, okay.
But it's a way of it's actually a way of building JavaScript applications in Java. And it actually can deliver other kinds of interpreted languages, such as Flash as well, actually.
I was just trying to clarify that acronym for the readers following
Google
along
Web
at home.
Toolkit.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, Karna?
I guess if you're looking for new areas, the 3 areas that comes to top of my mind on a mobile side, the application side are probably important. One is location-based services. More and more location-based services would probably become more important. And when I say location-based, not in a traditional sense, it also has to be context-sensitive. So don't just push me stuff just because I'm in Mars building. So the whole context and content needs to be married together. So their location-based service needs to bring those pieces. The 2 other areas I think are based on my discussions and what I've seen are quite important. One is in the financial vertical. Today, if you go to a store and you go to a teller, you have to give your credentials to the store, to your debit card or credit card, and they check it and they give it back to you and the money goes away. My view is that power shift needs to change. The store has to give you the credentials. You put it on your iPhone or BlackBerry, look it up, and just press the money and the money gets transferred. So the whole electronic wallet piece, moving the financial transaction, moving money between you and your kid's account, should be done from your mobile device. So the finance area, the whole transaction finance is a big area in my mind, is the second area. The third one is probably health. As the population ages, the health side of the applications on mobile devices become that much more critical. More and more stuff are getting imaging different ways. Consumers are a lot more literate in terms of they want to see their own scans in terms of what they have and don't have, and you store it on your home PC. You should be able to use your mobile device to move files and data around. So there's a couple of areas, I think from a human side point of view, as the population changes, ages, and matures in terms of its economy and social context, those are the areas you're going to see more and more emerging applications coming up. Health, finance, and and the location based. That's my personal opinion based on where I sit.
Thanks. That's great. And Bob, your thoughts on this?
Well, two, if I may. Number one, we get entranced with mobile, and I think we're talking about Mobile Monday. Mobility has changed. Originally, the cell phone was for people driving in cars and kind of moving at fast speeds, and you had to design the system for that. Mm-hmm. Now, wireless is being used for fixed mobile, i.e. people that don't move. It's for providing service. And of course, why? Cheaper, faster to deploy. So I think that the future probably is technology agnostic, that whether or not your broadband is accessed wirelessly or wireline or fiber optics, the consumer doesn't really care. I mean, it's interesting for him to know the three-letter acronyms about what goes on. I grew up with a whole generation who did nothing else create acronyms. The issue really is, how are you going to deliver the service, and how do you package it? You spoke about common billing. How long have we been talking about that? I was a teenager, and
just last year.
And the carriers say, "Oh, we stapled it together." Hey guys, and we charge by the minute, we charge by the distance, and everything is migrating towards fixed fees, monthly service fees. Great, very simple. You don't have to keep track of all that detailed junk. CDRs. It really doesn't. Another one, eh? It really doesn't matter. The people want. I want my TV, CATV. I want my broadband. I want my telephone voice service. I want to do text messaging. I want to do everything. And I want one bill. And I want one service carrier so that everything works. He's got to have soft failures, but everything has to work together. And how we move it from A to B, don't really care. Don't care whether you've got fiber optics to the home. Japan, they're putting 1 gigabyte to the house, to the residence. My God. I mean,
it's not enough.
It's not enough. Well, I went out to buy a little recording device, a little data storage device, and it's terabytes. Like, I talked about terabytes, but it was ethereal. Now you buy it for $99, and it has a terabyte. Next year it's going to be 10 terabytes. Now that boggles the imagination, but I grew up when $1 trillion was a lot of money.
Okay.
So you got to get with it. The second issue we touched on health. Have you ever been to a doctor and had an ECG? All right. If you get an electrocardiogram reading that comes out in a pink piece of paper with a squiggly line on it, right? And the doctor looks at it and says, "Aha, you're alive." And then if you go back a month later or 2 months later, I just went back recently, he takes your old printout and the new printout and lays them on his knees. He has the two squiggly lines, and he says, "Oh, they're different." Thank you very much. And why don't you use the computer for that? It's all digitized. And why do you squiggle it on a piece of paper? How much money is there in ECGs? On a worldwide basis? $1 zillion. Like a lot. Because when we originally digitized X-rays and scanning equipment, image scanning equipment, the saving is enormous. It's green. You don't have all those chemicals with developing photographic plates. You do it much faster. You transmit it very freely over the internet from one doctor to another. It can follow you anywhere as long as you've got the code. It's a wonderful innovation. Probably saves a few hundred lives a year. The problem you have is the doctors don't like it because you've always got that image and they can't claim they've lost the X-ray. It's just a little bothersome for the lawyers when you can produce all that stuff. So there are huge opportunities. But I think the point of fact is, in the longer term future, probably out 6-8 years, we are all going to have one bill from one carrier, probably just a transport company, who's going to provide the wireless, the fixed line, the fiber optics, the whole thing. And it's all going to come in. My estimate is $200 a month. And then on a global basis. And it will all be integrated because they will move it back and forth between the technologies, which means that the whole infrastructure of the world has to be rebuilt. Right. Is that an opportunity?
Absolutely.
I don't know.
Thanks.
A couple $100 billion to start. Okay.
Thanks, Bob. So at this point, we're going to open the floor to questions. As you can see, there are 2 microphones in the aisles about halfway down. Please use the microphones because this is being recorded and your question will not be heard unless you're at the microphone. So at this point, you know the topic. We're talking about Canada's position in mobile. We're talking about the opportunities. We're talking about the gaps, the environment. You know, it's kind of open season. It's a big topic. We'll take questions. We'll take comments. And if you like, direct them at one of the panelists. But we're going to refrain from having every panelist answer every question in the interest of getting through more questions. So has someone got a question? I don't. Please. Great.
You guys have talked about kind of the future of the next wave of things, one being transactions. Now, I spent some time in the Middle East and kind of share some similar views of how sheltered the Canadian lifestyle is from what's happening in the rest of the world. But we've said that transactions are the next wave. This is where things are going to go, where things are going to happen. Now, having worked for a managed service provider in Abu Dhabi, for example, and positioning out to Southeast Asian markets, transactions are much more simpler. You have less infrastructure, you have less services, so the value proposition is a much more simpler value proposition, which says, I really don't have a bank account. I don't have any other ways to make a transaction. And I don't have the infrastructure, so mobility is the best way. Now, looking at the Canadian market, and to some degree even the US market, infrastructure is readily available. There's POS terminals. I have the internet. I have every other means to make a transaction. I guess my question is that in order to have success of transactions or mobile transactions, is it enough to just do it in the Canadian market just purely based on transactions? Or are there other value-added services that are going to be required in order to really take it to the next level? And if so, what are those services?
Let me take a first shot at it. I mean, your question is a very complex one, largely because you have to go by the domain area. So if you take financial transaction, there are 2 types. One is where you need the infrastructure, the POS terminal is changing. But there are certain applications you don't need to change POS terminals. I'll give you, if you look up something, you'll see your credit card, debit card at the back where you have the MAC strip there. There's probably 14 kilobits of some memory space left. Certain things could be put in there. Whether it's in terms of encryption, security, or digital signature doesn't really matter. So there are certain things could be inserted. You cannot put a lot because there's very little space left. So that's, depending upon what applications are, there's one leverage one. Again, there are other transactions where you don't need to change any terminal at all. It's depending upon how it is done, meaning if you, the example I gave you going to the store and using BlackBerry as your credentials, you don't need to change anything. All you're doing is your BlackBerry or iPhone has a camera, meaning it has an eye. It can see a barcode, it can take the picture, and it can pass on the information, and you can send the money down transaction without giving your credentials to the store owner. Most of the stores, the POS terminal is a dumb terminal. There's one server in the back room, right? So it's basically one change there. So there are areas of spots, but certain areas could be very complex. If you really want to deal with the fraud issue on the transaction side, you're talking major upheaval in the POS terminal change and everything else. So depending upon what you pick, your answer could be but you could start somewhere. It doesn't have to be, because in India the transactions are simpler, there is no infrastructure need, and Canada and complex, therefore we cannot do it. It's an easy way out. That's, again, an opinion of one. I think there are points where we can start, we can build from, and slowly things will migrate. Somebody has to start it. We're just finding the reasons not to do it.
Well, the Middle East is full of cash, right? Everybody does business in cash. You go to bank and the guys come in with suitcases full of cash. And, well, counting cash is a big thing in the Middle East. The issue, I think, is where mobility has a value add significantly is security, because there is an ESN on your phone. And I think ESN should be on every phone in your house, every phone you use in business, so that there is an electronic identification. Second of all, we're all used to PIN numbers by now. So you have 3 levels of security to use a mobile type application for transaction processing. I think it's a level better than we currently have with credit cards, debit cards. So we can improve security. And I mean, Canada now has visas with chips on them. Whoa.
Kind of 10 years ago. Yeah.
A decade or so too late, but that's okay. We're finally there. And there is room on that chip. There isn't room in the magnetic stripe, perhaps, but it doesn't take many digits because you've got 3 or 4 other checks and balances. So we can eliminate it, and if you are inserting a PIN, you're triangulating and making it very difficult. I get my credit cards numbers stolen all the time. At least once a year, once every 18 months, somebody picks up a slip and some idiot has transcribed the number on the top of the slip and away they go and do some shopping for me. So I think we've got some really interesting stuff that's available to us around the world, and I think it works everywhere in the world. And the big thing about the Middle East or India or other countries, they haven't got the legacy systems. They'll start from where we leave off. That's the secret to, I think, the future, is to start where everybody else is leaving off. And you take it the next step. I was with Ford at one time and we created the Thunderbird. Wonderful vehicle. Who sold more, us or General Motors with the Corvette? Guess what? They sold a lot more and made a ton more money because they started where we left off. That's a big secret. Don't take the first step, take the second, take the third step. It's much easier to improve on the system because you've got a huge test market out there to tell you what you can do better.
Thanks. Next question here, and then following that, there.
My question is for Stephen. How do you think Google Voice is going to, I guess, revolutionize mobile and communication?
How's it going to? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
How is it going to impact mobile and communication?
How's it going to impact?
And how is it going to impact Skype and so forth?
Wow.
Well, I'm heavily involved in parts of the Google Voice initiative, particularly in releasing a mobile web-based version of it. It's interesting. I mean, it's fairly geographically stovepiped somewhat at the moment. How do I think it's going to impact? Well, I think that one way that it could impact the evolution of mobile applications or mobile services is that those services could be made open. It's something that is very near and dear to many people's hearts at Google, and I think that kind of a capability through a web browser available in an open manner could be pretty revolutionary in the production of other kinds of services. I could probably think of some other things, but maybe I'll leave it with that.
Just make one comment. You mentioned Google Voice, you mentioned Skype. It's very telling that Canada is one of the few OECD countries where, say with Skype, there isn't Skype in. Google Voice didn't launch here first. There may be a ton of reasons for it, but I understand that at least in some of the cases, certainly Skype, some of them are regulatory issues. Just making that comment.
Right.
And so something we should be looking at, because wouldn't it be great if Canada was always the first country people launched in because we were the most desirable? Anyway.
Google Voice is somewhat of a complicated question to answer.
I got that.
On video.
Next question.
Well, you somewhat stole my question, which was, when you look at mobile technologies, we were a year getting the iPhone, we were a year getting Android, we still don't have Kindle. As technologies come out, we're always behind. It always takes, not only are they more expensive here, but it just takes us that much longer to get access to them, unless you want to go to the trouble of unlocking these new devices. And Google Voice is another example. This is a software technology that's still, we don't have it here. So developers looking to work on these projects. We just don't have access to them unless we take measures that we probably shouldn't. So my question was, leading all that, a bit of a rant more than a question. But I was going to ask about Google Voice. He stole my question. But I also wanted to ask about Google Ventures, because I know you don't want to comment on that rant. But Google Ventures, are there investments in Canada yet, or US? What kinds of projects are you looking for?
Well, I don't represent Google Ventures, but peers of mine do. And I'm a huge advocate for them spending more time in Canada, since their mandate is North American, and I'm pretty sure we're part of that. So, as to how many, investments they've made or haven't made, they have made investments in their mandated area, and they're planning to make a lot more. In what areas? There's sort of a lot of areas, but like many parts of Google, they follow our mission, which is broad. Organize the world's information and make it universally available is a very broad mission. And one might argue that it includes healthcare, hopefully, and includes smoothing out other kinds of policy issues that could be of benefit to Canadians as a whole. I think that in addition to that, you're going to see investments in a wide range of biotechnology areas as well.
Just a comment or a question for Steve, and I don't know if Peter or Evans is still back there, but I'm wondering whether it would make sense to have the right person from Google come and speak about Google Ventures, either at a future Mobile Monday or perhaps at some Mars event or something like that. Right. Is that something you could help make happen?
I would love to try to do that. I'm working very hard on having them come up and spend some time in the greater Waterloo area, including Toronto, in the near future.
Are we a suburb?
Toronto's now a suburb of Waterloo. Yeah. Someone tweet that, please. Yes. Okay. You heard it here first. Okay. Good question. Next question, I think. Who was there first? I didn't watch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This panel seems to be identifying very contrasting trends in Canada. At one point, we're very innovative with our technology, but we're very late to adapt the technology. As you mentioned, there's only, from all the smartphone users, only 30% actually download the app. So I wanted to hear your comments and what you think SMS could do as a ubiquitous technology in helping everyone kind of take on some of these more fancy apps.
Didn't get your last part of the question.
Sorry, I wanted you to comment on the SMS as a ubiquitous technology that can be used across all phones and how it can help perhaps the wider population adapt some of these apps, maybe taking a few lessons from other countries.
Couple of comments there. I think SMS probably starting to get used with the younger generation a lot more today than a couple of years back. So SMS traffic, and Rogers folks and Bell folks are here. They can probably give you a much better number, but SMS traffic is probably pretty high up in Canada today. The other applications, my personal opinion is the whole commercialization strategy is poor. I think to previous gentleman's question, why Kindle is late, not because there are a couple of contributing factors in this. One, we're a small nation. So there's a market size, we're small. But at the same time, we don't make it easier to commercialize products and take it out to the market. And that kind of inhibits people from adopting. So you wait till somebody else has done, proven, and then it's launched. So we always play the safe role. We're not willing to take the bold step and try something out. And to some degree, the burden needs to be borne in this case by the distribution agents, which typically are the carriers. And they have to kind of take some bold steps to introduce new applications at a better commercial price to see if the population adopts. And I think that they need to own up to their part of the responsibility compared to some of the other carriers around the world, which are willing to do almost anything to try something new, to differentiate themselves, offer new applications and services, which we don't. And I think it's several contributing factors. We're small, 30 million people, widely dispersed, pricing issue, the capital structure, all of that stuff gets in the equation. At the end of the day, why you and I would buy it if it is not affordable and if it is not enticed me to go out and do it over something else? Why would I do it? I'd rather wait till somebody else does and it's proven. That's the issue today.
And I'd like to ask the questioner a question, because I think consider how much the desire to build an application on SMS might be tied to the state of the Canadian market, that if you were building the application in a different market, you might not even consider it. So I mean, SMS is a mature market, obviously, but in another country where the mobile web is as cheap as water, turning on the tap, not bottled water, you might have a different answer. So I don't know the answer to that, but I'm just throwing that out to provoke some thought, maybe.
But at the SMS create a much wider distribution.
Yeah.
Absolutely, there is no doubt.
Yeah.
SMS-based applications, even financial transactions on SMS will create a much wider distribution among the populations. If something is built on it, it's easier. Absolutely. Yes.
Right. Well, and certainly almost all advertising to date has been SMS-based in mobile, which mobile's trying to break out of that. And a lot of people in mobile are trying to get that next generation created, and it's still happening. So, next question, please.
I'm kind of taking the title here in Canadian leadership in a little bit of a different direction, a little bit more away from technology. Is there something as Canadians that we do really well in terms of soft skills that we can capitalize on? Or is there something in terms of soft skills that we cannot do to make us the next generation in terms of leadership in telecom?
I think there are let me kind of make a human side of the response to it, and then I'll defer to the rest of the panelists. Canadian, as a nation, we're a nation of immigrants. So we have a very deep root across the world. No matter which country you go to, if you're a Canadian, you can do trade very easily. And we do not capitalize on it that sufficiently. So to become leadership in the world, we do have the underlying pieces in our hand, being a immigrant country. We have reach into most of the geographies in the world you can imagine. And we should be able to leverage that to establish our leadership. We also have a very highly educated and very strong talent pool, as Steve mentioned before. So there are some of the building blocks are there. It needs some nurturing and support. And the missing pieces are, one is capital, two is policy. So there are a bunch of issues that are getting in the way. But if you look abroad, when they look to the Canada, they think we're a leadership country with a lot of potential and strong leadership in technology space. But we have very little to show for in terms of a really big and strong. There was Nortel, now there is RIM. In between there is a lot of vacant land.
May I? I'd just like to agree. The controversial panel. I'd like to agree entirely with that. I think that on Bob's point earlier that change breeds opportunity, or Sergey and Larry often like to say whenever you ask for something is like constraint breeds creativity, meaning no. But in Canada, I think we have done both of those things. We've done a lot with not that much. As a country, we've built an entire country. All of us are immigrants to this country. Not all, but I mean, most of us are probably immigrants to this country. And with change in other parts of the world where immigration is not perhaps as easy as it was, this is an enormous, perhaps unprecedented opportunity for our country. And this is not unrelated to the fact that I'm back in Canada. I came back to this country from the United States because I deeply believe that we can do more and need to do more and must do more as a country. And so, in Google, in Waterloo, I'm not sure what the exact demographics are. If I knew, I couldn't tell you, but it's enormously diverse. And it's largely been built upon the enormous talent that's been attracted to the educational institutions and the other fine companies in our area, because it's important not just to have one or two, as you mentioned, many vibrant companies, so people can come and not just go home. Like, it's great. I mean, it's fine to go home, but I'd rather you stayed and helped us in our country. And so I think that the contributors in our firm, at least, are at least 50%, if not more, people who have come to this country, perhaps gone, and now returned again. And this is an enormous, valuable asset for us.
Thank you. That's great. There's the answer to lack of capital. Constraint breeds creativity. Okay, next question.
I think it was
the next story about?
Hi, I was just wondering if you could tell us what kind of phones you have in your pockets right now. Maybe what's your favorite feature and maybe app that you have installed in them?
What kind of?
I'm sorry, I missed.
Yes. What kind of phone do you have on you right now?
It's a Samsung. I had a lot of relationships with Korea in the old days. You could look at that country and say, how do you pull off a miracle like that? Taking over the position in the mobile telecommunications business. So I think the issue, core issue is we are very bright. I think we have more than our share of brain power and capability, capacity. Second of all, we have to decide what we're going to become. And we need to make that decision at the corporate level, at the startup level, at the government level. We have to decide what we wish to do. We may not know how to do it at the moment, but we have to decide we are going to lead in this field. And then we do. Because you put the focus and the intelligence on one single objective. Could be the best transaction processor in the world. Okay. We can do that. And what kind of phone I have, it will change next time.
Okay.
That's the problem with technology. It will change next time.
Karna?
Personally, I use a BlackBerry Bold. In my home, we also use the iPhone, so we have a mix of stuff at home. But I use, because of the email centricity, I use the BlackBerry Bold. And application-wise, I use a couple of them, Bloomberg Point, which is a local application of, near me, tells me the movies or theaters, that kind of stuff.
I tend to rotate. I'm carrying an iPhone today, but I carry Androids. Anything that has a good, powerful browser. I guess I never heard the term superphone, but anything that's a superphone that's actually capable of experiencing the entire internet, I'll carry one. And as for applications, I'm sort of a big web applications kind of guy. That said, I also have a Sling player running on this.
So I always tend to carry two phones, one for kind of production, one for testing things. So my production phone remains for email and contacts, a BlackBerry. I carry an iPhone to test applications, but I'm considering getting an Android phone. I'm just kind of waiting for the next gen one to come out. Maybe you can help me with that, find the next one. But just to be able to try applications, because I agree, it's really important to be on the bleeding edge of platforms if you're trying this, as well as to be using phones that are in common use. Did that answer your question,
yes,
by the
way?
It did. Oh, and I have a lot of applications, and I must admit, the difference, I don't have almost any applications on the BlackBerry because for some reason the app world isn't pushed down to my platform, and because I think the carriers block it, if I recall. But whereas you just get the iPhone and suddenly it's got all these things in it. And I also have a jailbroken iPhone, so I can use that extra 20% of applications that aren't available under what Apple wants. So maybe I'm a bad boy, but I heard there's 100,000 people a month that do that. So I'm not a small group either. Okay. Thank you. Next question.
So this evening we heard Robert talk about this pipe dream where there would be this generic distribution utility that would give us all our internet connectivity and not put their hands in our pie. Okay. But in Canada, we have 2 out of the 3 major carriers in mobile who are actively in the business of also producing content. Bell through its CTV Globe Media assets, and Rogers through its acquisitions of things like City TV, Omni Television, Maclean's Magazine, etc. And we also know that the web is going to be where mobile is headed. So how do you see Canada's competitive position versus, let's say, in the US where Sprint is just a big generic pipe that delivers services? For developers, if our carriers are trying to nanny state us into what content we should view and restricting our ability to do that, what do you think the future of the carriers is in terms of their desire? Are they going to be more content controlled, or are they going to be more of a generic pipe that just lets everything through?
I think the carriers probably have some control, but the part of the piece they're missing, again, my opinion is it's not the institutional content that's going to take over, it's the personal content that's going to take over. So self-created content is going to be the biggest traffic on your mobile phone and internet over the next 2, 3, 5, whatever number of years it takes. it is the self-created content that is going to be the most dominant form of content rather than produced by, if carriers are, controlling one or two channels, let them have their share, it'll have its natural course and it'll continue to be there. But in terms of volume of traffic, application, and what people consume, it's one-to-one.
Phones with consumers who have phones that have good browsers and good internet connectivity use 20 times as much content. 20 times. And that's not just one type of content, it's all kinds of content. And that's the opportunity for a consumer-based innovator.
Okay. I was going to say one more question. You stood up, the two of you be the last two questions, and then we'll do a quick wrap, and because I think we want to honor the time commitment we made for time, but people can be buttonholed at the end. Please go ahead.
Yes, hi there. Mr. Howard, earlier you made the joke about how data is as cheap as water in some countries, and so my question for the panel is, first off, when we talk about data usage, services consumption, stickiness of applications, all this kind of stuff, is it apples to apples when we look at how we're doing things or how consumers behave in Canada versus other countries? And then the second piece of that is if it's not apples to apples, as in Canada's definitely a different situation with maybe data rates being considered higher. The second part of the question is, does the man on the street expect things to change with the new entrants? Is that supposed to be destabilizing to data prices, or is it not expected to be the case?
You want to go, Bob?
That's a complicated question, but I think the issue is that data, in most cases, is really not dense at all. And you don't, with the internet, you don't set up circuits for it. You just packetize it and ship it through. And when you ship it through, a pipeline that really has infinite capacity can really be expanded. Like we're talking now about expanding the fiber capacity by 1,000. That's 3 orders of magnitude. So data will flow at nominal prices. No question about that, because you can put in delays in the data. There isn't the time sensitivity there is with voice. So I think data is very cheap to handle. So will they give that away? Sure. They'll find a way to get the money. Another way, like as Google, you find a way to tap into a different money stream rather than charging per bit or kilobit or whatever. So I think data, because of its inherent insensitivity to delay, will in fact be extremely cheap. Whether it's going to be cheap as water, it's incredible. That costs more than gasoline, right? And we're the world's source of fresh water. So I think data will continue to be on this very steep price curve. Now, where will the other revenue streams come from to make money? I think it's in transaction and content. And the advertising thing that Google has tapped very nicely, that'll continue to grow because you will be able to customize through the database mining the kind of data, the kind of information you give to the individual customer. So I think it's going to be cheap. Now, where do we get our money? You're going to have to get your money other ways. But the old fact that the network was valuable when we charge you time and distance is gone. I mean, it's been gone for a decade.
Anyone else want to jump in?
You'll have to find other ways to make money.
Okay, great, thank you. Last question from stage
It was more
left.
or less just asked, but I'm going to ask it a little differently. In 2008, 2009, there were a number of companies that bought into the Canadian marketplace for the wireless world. I'm curious, we've been hammering a lot on two groups, the government, God bless them, and the other group being the carriers. There's a number of new carriers coming into the marketplace now. Are those, I don't personally believe that they're going to be a massive threat to the big 3 or 4 players across the country, but is there a belief that they're going to be able to muddle the waters and change the way those big companies operate, in your opinions? And more importantly, do you think that those little companies are now going to be able to affect some change as far as the deregulation in the government?
I think they can muddle the water and create some tension in the market. They're not small little companies. Global Live is backed by Orascom. If you don't know Orascom, it's one of the largest Middle Eastern, Egyptian-based conglomerate running at least probably about 15 carriers in Africa. So they're not small. They're bigger than BCE or Rogers put together. So that aside, I think a small entrance coming in would muddle the water. It'll create some tension. I think the pricing side will probably ease a little bit. But depending upon how the regulatory framework works out over time in terms of ownership and everything else, time will tell whether the competition sustains for long haul or not. There are multiple stakeholders here. I hope it does, because you and I as consumer will benefit from it, because we're paying one of the highest rates in the world today.
In 5 years, I think, like we've talked about, some small changes over 5 years. I think in 5 years you won't recognize our market at all. I think that companies that don't follow the consumers want, there's going to be created demand for media services that we're going to see and we're going to want, and companies that don't provide it are going to fall by the wayside.
The comment I'll add is just an anecdotal here, if I may. If you look at precious metals like gold, it's priced the same whether you buy in Canada, China, or Hong Kong. Ounce price is the same. I think the voice minute or the minute price over time will get pushed to the same globally as these kind of competitions intensifies. The local pricing paradox will disappear other than value-added piece.
I'd just like to reiterate something that Karna said, and it's interesting, because I said I was just in Austria, and about a month before I was there, Orange, which has operations in about 18 countries, just bought into one in Austria. It's now branded Orange. Canada's one of the few countries up to now where we don't have international significant investment in our mobile carriers because of government regulation. So I think that that's going to be a big change to actually have, and I don't know how that's done through the regulatory environment, but to have Wind Mobile backed by Orascom, which is what Global Live has been named, come in is going to change the landscape. But as well, let's not forget that the announcement I opened with, that Bell and Telus are putting HSPA on, so now everybody's competing on the same standard, unlike before, because Bell and Telus didn't have the handsets because they were on the losing standard, and so now everybody's on the winning standard. It's a much more level playing field. So I think we're just starting to see the games begin in terms of competition in this country, which is, I think, great for consumers, great for startups. So we're going to wrap up very, very briefly. Just to reflect on some of the things the panelists said. We talked about the carrier situation, which I think, in fairness, there's a healthy balance between the carriers and the handset manufacturers. The risk that you identified is the handset manufacturers, eventually the hardware commoditizes. The carriers have inherited a regulatory situation which have made them behave the way they are. They may have cultural reasons as well, but fundamentally, we can't necessarily solve the regulatory problem. But the third area is the whole area of where the real power is not the carriers, it's not the handset manufacturers, it's the people building applications that can find value. So applications, content, transactions, all of those things are going to win the day. And the internet's going to, I'm just reflecting back what the panel said, it's going to become mobile, the web's going to be mobile, it's all going to be one big thing. And so it's going to happen. And it's going to be very global, and we have to compete on a global basis. Now, so whether or not we solve the regulatory problem, these things I think are going to happen. The regulatory environment and our governments could probably speed that up if they helped with it. The last thing was capital. We didn't talk a lot about it, but I think in other Mobile Monday sessions, and it's been a common theme, we're low on capital here, and that is a remaining issue. And I hope that Sergey and Larry are right, as Steve says, that it breeds creativity. I think it does, but at some point it does take capital to build businesses. So that remains a challenge, again, that people have to deal with in this country. So some of the other thing to summarize, some of the areas people identified here, I noticed gaming wasn't mentioned, but just general consumer apps, security, e-health, the whole area of financial services as being areas where we're going to see a lot of change over the next time and big opportunities. So I think that's a quick summary. Do each of the panelists want to take just 30 seconds and anything they missed or want to highlight from what they got out of today before we wrap?
Not very much. It's interesting you mentioned gaming. We've been working on that for a little while. The issues are possible to overcome. It may take a little longer, but the real role of leadership is to get things out of the way And if the government's in the way, get them out. It can be done. We did it for many years. In the early stages, we moved them. So if the government policy is in the way, get it out. It's your job. It's a ton of money if you can do it, and you can.
I think the comment basically will be given most of the forum is early startups. You know, to my earlier message is, you know, really think market beyond Canada. You know, it's you do your innovation, what you're building, injustice if you don't tap into the larger and broader markets. It's harder to get to, but find a way to get there, because that is absolutely critical for success. Otherwise, you're dealing in a very, very small domain, and it'll be much harder to succeed.
On the question about games, I mean, I'm a huge believer in games and the combination of social media and entertainment, particularly games. And I'm not alone. I'm sure everybody's in this group, I'm sure, is addicted to that. I have a 2.5-year-old daughter who uses her iPhone every day. 2.5 years old. What does that even mean? So, yeah. Then in my house, I have 5 Apple TVs, so we're not the normal household, but
a geekette.
Yet.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Thank you.
If you're having trouble with technology, get your grandkids to look after it.
Yeah, exactly.
They can.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks very much, guys. On behalf of Alex and Dal, we'd like to thank you, Bob, Karna, and Stephen. And couldn't have done this without you, Randall. You were really well prepared today and brought up some great ideas and conversation points. So I'd like to give you all a round of applause for participating in our first Leadership Summit. I'd also like to thank the CWTA sponsorship and also MarketWire for helping out on a month-to-month basis. And special thanks to the Mars team for putting together another fantastic event. Janet's at the back waving, so Dawn Marie, Janet, Wendy, Ellen, Peter, Mr. Evans back there, yeah, that's great. So they always do a great job, and they've helped make the chapter very successful. So round of applause for them as well. Thank you. So we'd love to have the panelists back at some point in the future, maybe to participate in another leadership roundtable. It's a huge subject with a lot of different things that could be discussed, and we probably just touched upon the surface of it. So you're always welcome to join us in the future down the road. So thanks again. So we can continue with our networking. Thank you.